Hi, this is Eric Stabnow, music director of the Glenn Miller Orchestra, and you're listening to U.S. Modernist Radio.
Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Oh, I don't care what Mama don't allow, gonna draw mine modern anyhow. Mama don't allow no architecture around here.
Welcome to U.S. Modernist Radio, where we talk and laugh with people who enjoy, own, create, dream about, preserve, love, and hate modernist architecture, the most exciting and controversial buildings in the world. I'm Tom Guile. First up, especially for our concrete fans, art critic and author Blake Gopnik looks inside modernism through his book Brutalist Interiors. From there, we head to St. Louis to meet Pam Sanfilippo. She's with the Eero Saarinen-designed Gateway Arch National Park, and she shares how Saarinen's soaring 630-foot monument endures for millions of visitors. And we wrap up with the Rolling Stones of Swing, the Tommy Dorsey Orchestra, carrying forward one of the greatest big bands with leader Jeff Bush. And now, your host, Mr. Modernism, George Smart, is in a university library.
Thanks, Tom. We're going to talk today about university libraries. Wait, why am I whispering?
Yeah, why?
That was an artifact of the last century. Today's libraries, you can talk. You can drink coffee. You can even record a podcast. Nothing like the years when I grew up, which is good. How libraries are used is changing fast, but not a lot of libraries are keeping up. Here's the dirty secret nobody down at the university library wants to deal with. Shelves are groaning with thousands and thousands of magazines and books no one has read for decades, taking up space that could actually serve students. The data is clear and unambiguous. Yet if you suggest converting those stacks to special collections from alumni, study spaces, or hands-on learning labs, oh my God, the firestorms begin. Because this isn't about books. It's about turf. The subject matter specialist librarian just goes bananas because his or her customers are specialized subject matter faculty who also start the protest emails flying. Ask them to produce the circulation statistics, the actual numbers showing who's checking out what, and the conversation gets very quiet, very fast. Books and magazines just aren't what students want these days. Engineers are fine with it. They're completely online and couldn't care less about these old journals gathering dust. But the liberal arts, religious studies, history, art, architecture, that's where it gets interesting. Their resistance isn't rational, it's existential. These faculty don't care about the physical materials, but they care a lot about what those materials represent. Priority, prestige, and their subject matter's place in the institutional pecking order. Shrink the stacks, and they think you're shrinking their importance. Never mind that enrollment trends, funding shifts, and 100 other forces have nothing to do with bound paper. But the solution is ultimately going to be budget. When money gets tight, and it's getting tight at libraries everywhere fast, that's when it will be time to clean out those unread magazines and move on to adapt the space to present-day needs. When that day comes, architecture librarians, U.S. Modernists will be there for you. Ship your old architecture magazines to us. We'll even pay for it. And we'll scan everything and make it available to the world. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by the Brent R. Harris Charitable Trust, restorer of Richard Neutra's Kaufman Desert House in Palm Springs, and 6 other houses in California. And by Diane Bald and the Budman family, restoring significant architecture in Toronto, Los Angeles, Malibu, and Palm Springs.
Blake Gopnik has spent a lifetime immersed in modernism, starting with a childhood spent growing up inside Moshe Safdie's Habitat 67 in Montreal. With a doctorate from Oxford, Blake's career includes stints at the Washington Post, Newsweek, the Daily Beast, and the New York Times. He's also written acclaimed biographies of Andy Warhol and Albert Barnes, and his book Brutalist Interiors shows what it's really like to live, work, and think inside some of the most daring concrete buildings ever made. Here's George's conversation with Blake Gopnik.
Blake, before we start talking about architecture and your new book, I understand that you are in a place right now in Florida with protected roosters, like hundreds of them. What's going on?
Yeah, it's actually a place of real architectural significance. It's called Ybor City. It's a 120-year-old Cuban cigar rolling neighborhood. The Cuban cigar rollers are mostly long gone, but they left behind their prize roosters, and they're protected here in Tampa. I'm a visiting professor at the University of South Florida in their art department, so that's what brought me here from my home near Times Square in New York. And I'm being kept up all night long every night by crowing roosters. I've learned to enjoy it.
Yeah, I guess you get some earplugs eventually, right?
No, I've actually come to appreciate the crowing of roosters. It's a kind of jazz, you could say.
Now, I understand that you had the unique childhood experience of growing up in Habitat 67 by Moshe Safdie.
That's absolutely right. We arrived there when I was 5 years old from Philadelphia. My parents were both assistant professors, eventually at McGill University in Montreal. And we moved to Montreal partly, I'm told, in order to live in Habitat. We'd seen it the year of its making, 1967, at the Great Expo Fair, World's Fair in Montreal. My parents loved it so much that one thing that attracted them to Montreal was the prospect of living there.
Now, after the World's Fair, were these like apartments or condos, or what were they exactly?
They were actually a kind of public housing. The building was owned by an entity in the government of Canada. And officially, it was supposed to be, below market rate housing, for people of all stripes. Now, sociologically, what happened is the kind of people who wanted to live in Moshe Safdie's weird Habitat 67 turned out to be all middle-class people, of some cultural pretension. So it never became anything like public housing. And they soon realized it was kind of crazy to give these elite people a break on their rents. So the rents became normal market rate rents.
Now, our research staff dug really deep and discovered that while you were at Habitat 67, you dressed up as a medieval knight and ran around? What was all that about?
I don't know how you researched that. I wonder where that's from. Yes, I was, and to a very slight extent still am, in private at least, obsessed with the Middle Ages. I actually began a PhD on 10th century political thought a million years ago. So yes, I tied a horse's tail of sorts, a yarn horse's tail to my bicycle, and rode around in a tunic with a spear on the plazas of Habitat 67, which is one of the glories of that building. I'm probably the only person to realize, the benefits for a knight in training of living at Habitat 67.
So I have to suspect that you're a big fan of like the Knights Templar and all their history.
Well, they were a pretty unpleasant band, but as all knights were, in fact. But I'm a big fan more of chivalric romance, of Arthurian romance, than of the reality of the Middle Ages, which was about as nasty a time and a place as there could have been.
Oh, absolutely. Now, what led you to this new book, Brutalist Interiors?
I've written now and then about my stay in Habitat, but it's really always been about the exterior of the building, which is, if I can open a long parenthesis, in my opinion, one of the greatest architectural treasures certainly of Canada and of North America. I just cannot tell you how transformative it is to be in that building, to explore that building. Then they were writing this book about Brutalist Interiors, and I was kind of an obvious person. There aren't that many people who write about art and architecture who happen to have grown up in one of its treasures. So I was kind of an obvious choice, I think, for that.
Are most Brutalist interiors composed of the same kind of concrete that the exteriors are?
My guess is that most aren't, in fact. I mean, Habitat is peculiar in that it had to be a very functional, real building, real residential building. A lot of Brutalist residential structures are private houses for real serious connoisseurs, where the architect could go a little mad on the interior and have kind of highly, highly finished, gorgeous concrete walls on the inside. That wouldn't really work for Habitat because it had to be done on a budget. Mm-hmm. So the surfaces inside were fairly normal, just white walls. There were a couple of lovely little details. For instance, the light switches were a single black dot for off and a single white dot for on, which made the kind of functionalism of Brutalism evident even in the light switches. It was a lovely little touch that Moshe Safdie spec'd for that building.
When I was in Washington, D.C. recently, I went back to the D.C. metro system, which for me was a highlight of growing up, visiting that for the first time when it opened. It's still as glorious as I remember, and it's part of the book.
Yeah, I adore that. I lived in DC for 10 years, and in fact, wrote about brutalism there. I mourned the loss of the Christian Science Church right near the White House, which was a really great brutalist building that did not deserve to be torn down and was. Washington was losing brutalism at an incredible rate while I was there, which was 15 years ago. But certainly, I think that metro system is one of the great metro systems architecturally in the world, and really a brilliant example of brutalism. I find it really a very peaceful place because of the kind of cavernous, quiet austerity of the architecture there.
It was compared when it opened to a cathedral, particularly the stations that form a cross. And it certainly had that vibe walking through there.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And one of the things that proves is how different brutalisms, because it's really a plurality, how different brutalisms can be, because Habitat 67 could not be more unlike the metro system in Washington, D.C. The metro system in Washington, D.C. is indeed cathedral-like and calming, and you might say ponderous, but also has a gravitas that Habitat doesn't have. Habitat's quite the opposite. Habitat is all excitement all the time.
Very playful, yes.
Yeah, playful. It's jazzy in the extreme. I hate jazz metaphors because they're almost always empty, but it really works for Habitat 67. It's a place of constant change and dynamism and surprise.
All right, Blake, let's change gears. There's nothing more exciting than being in a mid-century brutalist structure and having a wonderful drink. And I understand that you are a mixologist. So what is the best drink to go with brutalism?
Oh my. Oh, I'm such an amateur mixologist, I'm afraid. Something very dry and savory, I'd say. Maybe a Manzanilla sherry martini would sort of work, I think.
What is a Manzanilla sherry? I don't know that one.
Oh, Manzanilla sherry is a kind of very fragrant but very dry sherry. Okay. And it has some of the same aggression that brutalism has.
I recently had some Chinese spirits, and they were extremely aggressive. They like attacked me and knocked me over the head. So
my favorite kind.
Now, what other kind of writing have you been involved in? I know that you grew up in a family of academics, right?
Yeah, more or less. Certainly both my parents were academics. I've got a couple of sisters who are serious academics. And then there's a mixture of writers, and there's a scientist in the family and a nonprofit manager in the family. But yes, a lot of us write either academically or for more popular press. And I'm one of the latter, though these days I've actually been teaching for the first time in 30 years and having a great time doing it.
So what were dinner conversations like in your family growing up?
They were lively in the extreme. You either killed or were killed. I was the second youngest, so I had to really work to be heard at all, but I did my best.
Yeah.
But it really taught me, I have to say, how to think, how to talk, how to participate in a conversation. It was really kind of wild. My parents really treated us very much like adults in a lot of ways. I had two much older siblings who were two of the most intelligent, but also intellectual and academic people on the entire planet, sometimes verging on being pedants. So it was really like being in a university, I have to say, growing up in my household. But a lot of it was in Habitat 67, which meant it was also kind of like being in an art museum. My parents collected minimal and pop art. So the combination of the beautiful quiescent spaces inside Habitat 67 with this very bold art in it really made for something very much like a museum experience.
So were these dinner conversations all over the place, or was it mostly art or architecture or politics, or where did you guys go with these?
Yes.
Yes.
We went absolutely everywhere. Art, architecture, politics, food, you name it, we went there, except sports. Though my oldest brother is a huge sports fan, and so is my father. They were the only two people who really were going to talk much about sports. The rest of us were not so interested in that.
And was that hockey, maybe, or something else?
Absolutely hockey, because we were in Montreal during the great heyday of the Montreal Canadiens. So even I, though I'm no sports fan and never have been, there's no way I was going to ignore the great, great teams of the Montreal Canadiens from that era. So they were actually heroes in our household, despite being a sports team.
Brutalism has had a reputation of being oppressive or cold, but I noticed in this book there's really a lot of warmth to these interiors.
Yes, I think that's absolutely just a complete misconception about brutalism. It's weird because, of course, as you know, the word brutalism doesn't come from the word for brute or brutality. It comes from the French word béton brut, which just means raw concrete.
Yeah.
So it's not about brutalism at all. It's about using concrete raw so you can see it and feel it. And concrete's actually quite a warm surface. So brutalism is never really brutalist. It can become brutal only when it's badly kept up and starts looking sad and cracked and stained. And that can happen easily because, in fact, it's a very delicate, sensitive medium.
I know it's very interesting how you can look at one concrete building from, say, 1962 that looks almost new and one 2 blocks away that is crumbling. And all boils down to construction techniques, I believe.
And upkeep over the years, how well it's been sealed. Just the smallest crack left unsealed, of course, especially, think of it, in Montreal, where it goes from ridiculously cold to almost as ridiculously cold.
Mm-hmm.
It's really not kind to concrete structure, especially one built by a 24-year-old Mediterranean heritage, which was Moshe Safdie at the time. His building required entirely new modular construction. No one really knew what they were doing at the time because everything about Habitat 67 was new. And I've been back a number of times over the years as a visitor, and I have to say it's holding up unbelievably well. I mean, they're maintaining it. They're spending a great deal of money. But aesthetically, it's as great as it ever was. I go there and my heart just soars being in those spaces. And I really doubt that anyone wouldn't feel that way. I challenge any brutalism hater to go there and not feel that it's a tremendously uplifting place.
Well, let's talk about that. I don't know how it is in Canada, but in the United States, there's been a big backlash under President Trump and Justin Trudeau and others like that to get rid of brutalist buildings in our nation's capital.
Not just brutalist buildings, but of course, modernist buildings in general. Yes, there's always been a reaction to modernism of any kind, and it's been pretty consistent. There are people who want curlicues and gold and pseudo-classical columns on buildings, and they're allowed to want what they want, but that just means that we're all condemned to having utterly mediocre architecture, and I frankly don't think that's much good for the society or the culture. So I obviously am in favor of modern architecture and postmodern architecture and brutalist architecture, and Washington has some great examples. Now, there's the debate about the FBI building, which was never a great brutalist building.
Right.
It's a great big brutalist building, but I think it deserves to exist as much as any of the mediocre neoclassical buildings in Washington, D.C. There's lots of bad architecture from every period. And what happens is, when it gets old enough, it gets preserved. I like to cite the fact that the so-called Great Penn Station of the 1920s was derided by architecture critics when it was first built.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, it became something precious. It was being destroyed in, I think, 1963.
That is really interesting. I didn't know that people were against it when it was built.
Yeah, they considered it a really shoddy, cheap version of neoclassicism, kind of overblown and uninteresting. I mean, people had extremely refined senses of what neoclassical architectures could be, or decorative architectures in general. So we see almost all old decorative architecture as equally wonderful. But at the time, of course, people distinguished very, very carefully and closely between good buildings with columns and bad buildings with columns. And of course, we just plow them all together as great old buildings. And if only more brutalism lasts another 100 years, people will value it incredibly, and not a single piece will be torn down. I guarantee you that anything that survives the next 100 years will be preserved for the following 100 if we all manage to last that long.
Well, I certainly hope so. Well, this has been really fun. Thanks so much for talking with me, Blake.
Oh, it's a total treat. I always just love talking about Habitat and trying to get more people to appreciate its glories.
Can people visit it? Is there a public aspect to the complex?
There now is. I don't know exactly how often, but on a schedule. One of the largest unit in the entire building at the very top, a kind of penthouse in the building, is available for visits. And it has the particular quality of having been the very apartment that I grew up in. There were 6 kids, so we needed a giant apartment, and that's the one, which then, after we moved out, became Moshe Softy's apartment. And he donated it to, I believe, McGill University, which now opens it to the public on certain days every year.
Well, I've got to put that on my list. Thanks so much for talking with me.
It's been a total treat.
That was George's conversation with Blake Gopnik. Pam Sanfilippo is Program Manager of Museum Services and Interpretation at the St. Louis Arch. It's officially called Gateway Arch National Park and was designed by the great Eero Saarinen. Pam's job is to shape how visitors experience and understand the Arch and the history of St. Louis as the gateway to the West. George started his conversation with Pam Sanfilippo by asking her about another iconic location in St. Louis.
Pam, before we start talking about the Gateway Arch, let's talk about another mid-century marvel in your town. And that's the airport, Lambert Airport, designed by Minoru Yamasaki. That is a great mid-century marvel, isn't it?
It is. I don't know a lot about its history, but I live nearby and obviously use it frequently when I travel.
I understand from the airport master plan, they're going to save it, the basic domes of it, and they're going to build a new expansion area for it, which is great. I'm so glad that they're going to keep it.
Yes, I know the other expansion is entirely separate, so it'd be nice to see the original in all its glory.
Now, the Gateway Arch was the product of a competition to design a monument for St. Louis's gateway to the West. And when did this all gear up? When did the competition start going?
The competition wasn't held until 1947, but the park had been established back in 1935 under executive order by President Roosevelt, thanks to civic leaders here in town who wanted some kind of memorial to Jefferson's vision of westward expansion and a continental nation. So it took quite a few years before things actually got rolling after World War II to actually get the competition started.
So the Gateway Arch is pretty unusual, particularly for its time. Were there any other kind of wacky ideas submitted? I assume that you've probably seen the records, right, for all these?
Well, there were 172 entries submitted from all across the country, and the judges, the jury set up parameters as far as not only the initial submissions, but how they were actually going to judge them too. They then narrowed it down to 5 different finalists, and then those finalists were asked to submit a second round of designs. And when the jury met, they decided to kind of do a test ballot just to see, kind of where things were standing and what things they were going to have to discuss to look at. Well, it turned out it was unanimous for Eero Saarinen's design. And so they didn't have to go any further than that.
Oh, that's great.
But the other designs ranged from more of an obelisk to just a traditional building, pillars, columns, all kinds of different things, but nothing as unique as the arch.
And what was also unique about this is that up until that point, really nothing had been done like this. They didn't actually know quite how they're going to get people up into the arch, so they had to invent the transportation system.
Yes, Eero Saarinen, fully intended from the beginning of his design that people would be able to travel to the top, but he had no idea how to make that happen. And he tapped Dick Bowser to come in and, based on the parameters that they had for how many people they wanted to get up in the tram system. And Dick Bowser had 2 weeks to come up with a design, which he did after, many, many attempts to figure that out. He ended up with a combination of a Ferris wheel and an elevator and an escalator was the only way he could get people up to the top. Separate operating systems in each leg, but identical.
So there are 2 trams, essentially, right?
Yes,
And they work independently of each other, or do they counterbalance each other?
they work independently from one another.
Okay.
And it's all a cable system. There are 8 cars in each tram, and each car can hold 5 people. So a total of 40 people in each tram can go up and then down. And it takes about 4 minutes to go up and about 3 minutes to come down, thanks to gravity helping it go along.
Well, I have visited the Arch, and when I got to where the trams are, it was really like going back in time because, this is old technology. I mean, it was state of the art at the moment. But now you kind of wonder, is this thing still going to work? And amazingly, it does, doesn't it?
It does. They have updated some systems that are more digital now instead of the mechanical systems. But the trams themselves and the way it operates on the cables is that original design.
Now, what is the outside of it made of?
The outside of the arch is stainless steel, about 3/4 inch thick, sections as large as the width of the leg, or it's an equilateral triangle. So each side is 54 feet at the base, up to 17 feet at the top.
Okay. And up at the top of that, people can just see this incredible view.
Yes, there are windows on each side of the arch facing east and west, but basically you can get a 360-degree view pretty much from up there and see for about 20 miles each direction on a clear day.
And of course, the arch can be seen from 20 miles in each direction, particularly if the sunlight is glinting off of it.
Yes, and we have, thanks to partners, we have a lighting system at night so that it lights up as well. And people always wonder when we have those off for things such as bird migration, we turn the lights off at night twice a year, and visitors are always, well, where'd the lights go? Or people who live in St. Louis are watching and wondering.
I was watching one of those airplane stunt shows this weekend where they have the guys in the little jets buzzing around. Have they ever done that there at the arch where they'll fly little planes through the arch?
No, it is against FAA regulations and Park Service regulations to fly through the arch. However, St. Louis has a big show during 4th of July, and there's typically an air show as part of that planes are over the river.
Okay.
So the grounds of the arch make a perfect viewing for that.
Yeah. How many people visit the arch every year?
We have about 2.5 million visitors a year.
Wow.
Now, not that many are going to the top. Some of them are on the ground visiting the museum or just enjoying the park grounds, 5 miles of walking and hiking and biking paths, things like that. But many of them do go to the top as well.
That's really incredible. 40 people at a time. You get that many people going up to the top.
Yes, summers can be backed up and tickets are sold out before the day even starts.
Now, do people get married up there?
We have had some proposals at the top of the arch. We haven't had a marriage up there. People have about 10 minutes at the top. Since COVID, we've refined our procedures a little bit so that it doesn't get so packed up at the top of the arch. People go up on one tram and come down on that same tram. They have about 10 minutes at the top. So it'd be a little harder to get a wedding ceremony in that short of time.
But if you organize it, you could knock out a wedding in 10 minutes.
You probably could.
We're going to give somebody an idea here. You're going to see that happening very soon. You've had a long career in public history. You worked at the Eisenhower Center. You worked with Ulysses S. Grant Center. You've really had a front seat to historic preservation and the sharing of American history.
It's been an amazing career and journey, and an honor to work in this field. When I started at the Grant site, my background was colonial American history, so I thought that was modern ages to go to the 19th century, and then moved to the Eisenhower Library, where I was amazed to see the connections between an 19th century general who became president and a 20th century general who became president. And then when I moved back to St. Louis, my hometown, to take the job here at the Arch, I found another connection from there to Eisenhower. He is the only president to ever have gone to the top of the Arch.
Really?
Yes.
That's surprising.
The tram system went into operation in July of 1967, and in November of 1967, he went to the top of the Arch. He wasn't supposed to. Secret Service didn't want him to, but I guess you don't tell the commanding general of the Army during World War II and the two-time president, no.
Now, I was really pleased to learn that when you're up there and there's a tornado, you're pretty safe because of the way it's constructed.
Yes. Throughout the design, development of the arch construction, they really were concerned about ensuring that it stayed standing. And so they tested it, and the design is such that it can withstand about 150 mile per hour wind and only sway about 18 inches east to west.
Okay. So does it sway like in the same plane as the arch, or does the arch kind of wobble back and forth? Which way does it sway most of the time?
East to west.
Okay.
So
because you're looking out to the west. That's the whole point of the arch. I got it.
Correct. Even on a fairly windy day, let's say 40 mile per hour winds, you can feel it up at the top. It's not swaying anywhere near 18 inches, but visitors and staff have noticed that sway. We do show in our theater the documentary created by Guggenheim about the construction of the arch. It's called Monument to the Dream, and it's an amazing documentary about the construction of the arch and the workers, with live footage as well as photographs while the workers were constructing it. It's amazing.
I had the privilege of visiting Dubai a couple of years ago and visited the Dubai Frame, which is a giant picture frame that you go up the elevators on the sides and you go up to the top where the bar is going across. And it's very much in concept like the arch. Are there other arch-like structures that you know of in the world?
Not of this same magnitude. I think that certainly the arch itself has been a design,
right,
from early times, Roman, Greek, but this type of arch and the fact that you can take that tram ride to the top in this system, it's a one of a kind.
That's really cool. Are there any special events at the arch during the year people should know about if they're planning their vacation?
Well, certainly 4th of July this coming year will be America 250. So we will be having lots of events, and there will be activities on the grounds. The park always does a lot of special programs during the summer when we have some extra staff on board for summer season. There are speaker series, some music performances, of course, our ever popular Junior Ranger program. We just reopened the old courthouse after a 5-year renovation, which is all part of Gateway Arch National Park as well. There's always something to see and do.
Thank you, Pam. This has been a real pleasure.
Well, thank you.
George is speaking with Pam Sanfilippo. The Tommy Dorsey Orchestra set the gold standard for big band swing. In the 1930s, Dorsey created a sound that was elegant and endlessly danceable, powered by legendary arrangers and singers like Frank Sinatra. Nearly 70 years after Dorsey's untimely death, that legacy is still very much alive under the direction of Jeff Bush. A world-class trombonist, educator, and longtime member of the band, Jeff Bush brings fresh energy, leading one of the greatest big bands of all time and carrying the Dorsey sound into the present. Here's George and the Tommy Dorsey Orchestra's Jeff Bush.
Jeff, before we talk about the Tommy Dorsey Orchestra, I understand that at one point you have played for a pope, Pope Benedict. I thought he'd be more of a heavy metal guy, but was he into swing?
That's funny. And yes, we certainly did. In fact, For about 2 years, I worked with the great entertainer and vocalist Harry Connick Jr. And Harry put together a special concert in Yankee Stadium for when Pope Benedict visited the United States. And it was quite an event with a full string section, orchestra, plus Harry's band. It was in the original Yankee Stadium. So it was quite an event, and the security was strong. We'll just say that, quite strong.
Yeah.
So, but it was quite an event, yeah.
And so I imagine at some point during the evening you played It Had to Be You, which is kind of his big hit from When Harry Met Sally.
It was actually part of a mass, so it was much more sacred leaning.
Okay.
So there was not so much in the way of American popular song.
Well, I would think there's some people who would think It Had to Be You is a sacred tune, in the canon of American music.
Isham Jones, that's a great song, absolutely.
Now, you have a whole lifetime of music. You started at about 4 with banjo and piano. You picked up the trombone. You toured with the Glenn Miller Orchestra, another famous group from here. It just got me started on the internet, kind of looking up all these different bands from the 40s, and a lot of them, like the Tommy Dorsey Orchestra, are still going, which I find amazing.
Yes. People are starting to call them legacy artists now. That's a newer term, meaning we're not the new kids on the block, but it's timeless music that people, they still love it. And we're happy to go out and put on a show of some of the greatest, it's American music. That's our American orchestra right there. And I'm extremely proud to keep this music going, and to see what it means to people is really something on a live show. In fact, just about 10 days ago, we played at the National Warplane Museum in Geneseo, New York, which is amazing on its own to see all these warplanes. But then there's a gentleman who was a World War II veteran. He's 102, a waist gunner who was shot down and held for as a POW for 14 months. And there he was, not only just in attendance, but dancing and very active. And just to see what that music means to people is really something special.
Swing has had some kind of ups and downs. I remember that it was huge in the 90s.
Right.
There were lots of movies about swing. There was Swing Kids, for instance.
Yes.
And everybody started swing dancing again.
That's right. And I can't exactly say how and why that came, but there was definitely that resurgence in the 90s. And some of those bands that came through, like, let's see, the Squirrel Nut Zippers were one that was popular, and Big Bad Voodoo Daddy was another one. And I'm probably leaving out a couple of bands, but I was starting to get into this music right around that time, maybe a little bit before that. But yes, we see a little resurgence from time to time in great music.
So when did Tommy Dorsey start his orchestra? Was that in the 30s?
Yes, Tommy and Jimmy split up on what used to be called Decoration Day, which is now known as Memorial Day, and that was in 1935. And they were working at the Glen Island Casino, which was a spot that gave so many bands their start because it has a live broadcast in New Rochelle, New York. And they had some disagreements, and Tommy walked off the stand, and he had to come back and fulfill the contract a little bit over the summer, but he was already in plans and had his own band. He recorded in September of 35, and then he was pretty much off and running towards the end of that year. And
he passed away in 1956.
Yes.
But the band did not. Who took over leading it over the next few decades?
There were a handful of people. So when Tommy died in November of 56, that was quite a surprise. Brother Jimmy was known to have been ill during that time, and Jimmy passed about 6 months later. But Tommy died, and they were in the middle of a 6-month engagement at the Café Rouge in the Hotel Statler in New York City. They had just signed a new agreement to appear there for the next 5 years, which is a pretty amazing amount of work.
Yeah.
But Jimmy fronted the band through the end of that contract, which went to early January of 57. Once Tommy's estate was settled, the following year of 1958, the band went out with Warren Covington, who was a trombonist, and he was a band leader as well. Warren had a big hit with the Tommy Dorsey Orchestra on Tea for Two, Cha-Cha. And he had that for a few years. And then tenor saxophonist and a veteran of the big bands named Sam Donahue had it from, I believe, 61 to 65. And during that time, Frank Sinatra Jr. was on the band. And then for a short time in 1966 was led by Irby Green as well.
You know, I've seen Frank Sinatra Jr. perform. He's gone now. But
Yes.
He was a great singer, and he never really got to shine on his own.
Absolutely. Well, there's pretty big footsteps that he had to with his father, but a great singer, great musician. He actually served as his father's conductor late in Mr. Sinatra's career. So he's a fine musician as well as a great vocalist.
The Tommy Dorsey Orchestra is really recognized as one of the best all-around dance bands in big band history. Tommy Dorsey was known as a sentimental gentleman of swing because of this song called Getting Sentimental Over You, which was a huge hit for the band. And you guys use it to open almost all of your shows. We're going to hear that now. The intro is Getting Sentimental Over You, and it shifts into Opus 1. Here's the Tommy Dorsey Orchestra. Now, at what point, Jeff, was Buddy Rich, the drummer, involved with the band?
So Buddy would have been with the band in the early to mid 1940s. So those exact years, he was on the band when Frank Sinatra was on the band.
Okay.
So early 40s for sure, but he stayed a little bit longer as well. Yeah.
Because I remember seeing him years back on the Johnny Carson show when he would come on and do drum solos, right?
Right.
But all he would talk about was his martial arts training. He evidently was a big black belt.
That's what I understand, yes.
In his life, and just loved it. Competed, went to tournaments, did that whole thing.
He was in the Marines during World War II as an instructor in, I don't know if it was jiu-jitsu, but it was some type of martial arts. So yes, he was highly trained in that skill.
You have appeared on over 40 albums, and you've done some jingles. I was wondering, tell me a little bit about doing jingles for Jeopardy and Rice-A-Roni.
Those are a long time ago. Let me see what I can remember. The Rice-A-Roni one was...
the San Francisco Treat, right?
The San Francisco treat. Yeah. Now, if I said that to my kids, they wouldn't know what I was talking about. But I remember it being somewhat improvised, and I had to play like a quasi Dixieland type of sliding type of trombone. And I remember watching the video in the studio, and there was no written music, so they wanted it to be improvised. And where it went from that,
You're right. There was a tune. It went like the San Francisco treat.
Sure. They all had a little phrase that was always used for advertising. Yeah.
And did you do the Jeopardy theme song, or was it some other thing for them?
That was something that I used to play in the Cab Calloway band. It was led by Cab's grandson, and the entire band was hired to do like a Heidi Heidi High version of the Jeopardy theme song.
Oh, wow.
For radio. I believe it was radio. And that's probably 20 or so years ago, I would guess. So
I remember watching Cab Calloway in the Blues Brothers years back.
Yes.
Which is, you know, if you're a musician, is a wonderful movie to watch. I mean, oh my God.
Absolutely.
People in that film.
So many.
You've got John Belushi and Dan Aykroyd just yucking it up the whole way through, just having a great time.
Yeah, they really played those characters great.
One of Tommy Dorsey's other big hits is called Boogie Woogie, and we're going to hear it now.
on the original piano solo.
Jeff, I watched your concert that you recorded at Avalon. Understand that was a special night for you.
It was a very special night. That was actually my first night as a music director of the Tommy Dorsey Orchestra, and the first night that we had the band out under new management, and it was a very exciting and special night for sure.
Now, I got to ask this question because I just noticed weird stuff like that. So that night, there was a woman sitting at the end of the row, blonde, with a saxophone, and it seemed like she had like 3 saxophones she was juggling in her lap the whole time. Poor woman. I just couldn't figure out what was going on over there because she just kept rotating saxophones in and out. Who was this person?
Well, I believe that's Lee Pilzer, and she plays with us when we're on the East Coast, and she's great on the baritone saxophone chair, which is the main instrument on that chair, but our arrangements also call for that chair to double on bass clarinet and alto saxophone. And sometimes there's even some B-flat clarinet in that book as well, but that's kind of in the tradition of the saxophone chairs in the big bands that they would all double on different instruments. So it's kind of commonplace for that.
Your band that night played the very traditional set, right? For the band.
Yes.
Do you guys ever go like off menu and do a little country or do a little pop tune or something like that in your performances?
Well, we have to play the hits that people would expect us to hear, which I have no problem doing. But we do every now and again do what I'll call a regional specialty. For example, when we were in Texas earlier this year, we played in San Antonio. So I did do an arrangement of the Bob Wills tune, San Antonio Rose. So that's more like Western swing. That might be about as close to country as we get. But it seemed to be very appreciated by the folks in the audience, and it worked out. I turned it into like 3.5 minute long pop record from about 1944 or something. I keep it somewhat in the big band tradition, but stray outside of those confines a little bit to bring that in.
Now, all the big bands of that era had to have a Christmas album that they were doing of sort of Christmas swing and jazz tunes. So what's your favorite song from that genre?
Christmas music, well, let's see here. There's a lot of great vocals. One that we have that I enjoy is that Bing Crosby did called Mele Kalikimaka, the Hawaiian Christmas song. And we have that in our repertoire for when the Tommy Dorsey Orchestra does our holiday show. But we also have an audience sing-along song that we play that we like to do, get everyone singing White Christmas. And we have a number of some Dixieland Christmas that we do. We have some new arrangements. The Tommy Dorsey Band didn't have a ton of that music in their repertoire, so we certainly added it because we do a dedicated holiday show called Sentimental for the Season that seems to go over very well with the folks.
Well, Jeff, thanks so much for talking with me. You guys are like the Rolling Stones of swing. You're just going on and on and on, and it's wonderful. And I can't wait to see you perform.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate the invitation, and I do look forward to meeting you in person whenever we're in the North Carolina area, for sure.
Thanks for listening. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by the Brent R. Harris Charitable Trust, restorer of Richard Neutra's Kaufman Desert House in Palm Springs, and 6 other houses in California. And by Diane Bald and the Budman family, restoring significant architecture in Toronto, Los Angeles, Malibu, and Palm Springs.
Visit usmodernist.org's massive archives to listen to past shows, discover documentation of 25,000 significant modernist houses, and access 5 million pages of classic 20th century architecture magazines. U.S. Modernist Radio is produced by Soundtracks Recording Studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. Our theme song is performed by George Smart and Robinson Earl, with guest research by Bobby Morris. Got a guest to suggest for our show? Write her at bobby@usmodernist.org. U.S. Modernist Radio is a production of Modernist Archive Incorporated, a nonprofit educational archive for the documentation, preservation, and promotion of modernist residential design. I'm Tom Guild. George and I'll be back soon with another preservation-centric edition of U.S. Modernist Radio.